Welcome to the Sewing Whisperer. In this video you'll learn how to use an overlocker confidently, from sewing straight lines, right angles and splits to mastering different types of seams. I'll also show you tips on thread placement for better colour matching and efficient thread use. If you're new to my channel, welcome. Over my 30+ year career in the rag trade, I've taught hundreds of students how to sew, and I look forward to helping you on your sewing journey. There are two types of overlockers or sergers, which are distinguished by their tensions. One has slot dials with lay-in threading, and the other has circular tension dials. The operating of both types of machines are very similar. Refer to your manual for the specific information on your machine. I'm using my Janome 134D for this tutorial, but have kept the instructions as generic as possible. For information on threading the machines, check out my previous video linked in the details below. Basic operation. To operate the overlocker, lift the foot. Note that I just lift it gently with my thumb for most fabrics. Thicker fabrics you need to lift the foot lever for more height. Press the foot treadle and ensure at least 2 to 3 mil or 1/16 of an inch can be cut off as you sew. Keep sewing until the chain's long enough to be cut by the cutter or trim with your clippers. When I first started in trade, before heading into the design room, I was required to be trained on an industrial plane machine and overlocker. That meant mastering and working at the correct speed and quality on each machine. The overlocker operators were checked regularly to ensure they were cutting the correct amount of seam, not too much and not too little, as part of the quality control within the company. This sample is showing the difference between a seam that hasn't had any fabric cut off, and you can see the loopiness at the top. It's very important to trim a little fabric as you overlock. This side has had some fabric trimmed and is sitting much better on the edge. Let's look at stitch length. The stitch length on my machine is located on the right side of the machine. Some machines have it located on the left inside the side slide plate. Lower the number to achieve a shorter stitch, which is suitable for finer fabrics. The higher number will achieve a longer stitch length for heavier fabrics. How to overlock straight. When needling a straight stitch seam, align the row of stitching with a mark on the foot or the edge of the foot depending on the seam width. Keep your eye on the aligned section and sew the seam. You can see that the overlocking is 100% parallel to the row of stitching. Now let's look at the different seams that can be produced on an overlocker. Firstly, 3-thread overlocking. This is used for neatening seams that have already been plain machined, as well as attaching elastic to swimwear, activewear and dancewear. It can be set for a narrow or wider width. For a narrow seam, remove the left-hand needle and thread. I just cut the thread at the tension so I don't have to completely rethread it at a later date. Sew a sample. I tend to only use the narrow width for the rolled hem and prefer the wider 3-thread because it's stronger. For the wider seam, remove the right-hand needle and thread and replace the left-hand needle and thread and sew a sample. The next seam type is a rolled hem. Follow your machine manual for the correct setup for your machine. Some machines will have a seam width adjustment lever. Push the lever towards you. These machines will not require the throat plate to be changed. My machine requires a different throat plate. Remove the left-hand needle. Undo the screw and remove the standard throat plate. Place the rolled hem throat plate into position and insert the screw. Set the stitch length to R and the differential feed to 1. Place the sheer fabric sample into the machine and sew. The stitch is best suited to shears. These are some examples of rolled hems. This is a shear sample. Here is the selvage edge and here is the cut edge, and I've cut around in a quarter circle, which means this is the true bias grain at 45 degree, which is quite stretchy, and the rolled hem has behaved itself quite well on that true bias stretchy section. Here is the standard straight grain edge, and see how well it's sitting even on the wrong side, which of course you would normally use matching thread. Here on the bottom right is the standard 3 thread with a narrow stitch setup, and this is a rolled 3 thread hem, so you can see the difference with the settings. My needle and top looper tensions have been set to 3, but I had a play and tightened the bottom looper, so there's less of the green bottom looper thread showing, and the top looper thread is being pulled right over to the back. The needle thread is not being affected at all. Sometimes I find if you use a shear with an open weave, particularly on the bias, but also sometimes on the straight edge, it just falls off, in which case you're best not to use an overlock rolled hem on that fabric. Always sew a test sample before committing to the rolled hem seam, and you may find you're better off using a double folded narrow hem on a plain machine. The next seam is the flat lock stitch. The flat lock seam can mimic a decorative cover stitch, but isn't quite as strong as a true cover stitch, which is produced on a completely different machine. To set up the machine, set the tensions as follows: the left needle to 0, the top looper to 3, and the bottom looper to 7. Remove the right hand needle and thread. Sew a sample of fabric. The seam is designed to join two pieces of fabric together in a flat seam. Pull the fabric apart to flatten the seam. It's not a strong seam, but used more as a decorative seam. There are times when you need to neaten a right angle. The easiest way to do this is to place just a small snip in the corner so that it can open out. Place the fabric against the edge of the knife, sew a little bit. Then as you approach the corner, you can create a little bit of a fold at the center. The aim is to keep the edge as close to the knife as you can. When the knife cuts, it's located here, but the needle is further along or behind, about 1.2 centimeters or ½ an inch away from the cut edge. So there's a little bit of distance from where it's been cut, but not sewn. Spread the tuck out so it's not a complete fold in the center, because you don't want to end up with tucks. Sew through the intersection. It may take a couple of practices to master this, but you can see that it's sitting quite well. It looks creased, but after a press it sits much better. That's the technique to use when neatening a right angle corner. You may come across times when you need to overlock a split, which can be quite difficult to get into this corner. The best way to do this is to pull it out so it becomes a straight line to feed through. Pop it under the foot and sew a little bit. Spread the folds out so they are not just one big tuck, but a couple of smaller tucks, and the center can be moved back slightly from the knife, so as you go under the foot, you're not cutting any off. Don't keep it right against the edge of the knife, because then you'll end up with tucks. Sew the remaining seam. It looks creased, but after a press they've pressed out beautifully. The importance of thread reel positions. Let's look at where you place certain threads to be thread conscious when overlocking. When placing the reels of thread onto the overlocker, you need to be mindful of a couple of things. If you haven't got matching colours and you're overlocking a knit, then the most important colour match should be on the left-hand needle. If you have 4 reels like I have here, one is slightly off colour, you wouldn't put it on the left-hand needle. You would put it onto one of the others, preferably the right-hand needle, because that one shows the least. The reason for placing the best matching thread on the needle for a knit is if the fabric is straining and pulling, that row of stitching is the colour you're going to see. That row of stitching there is the colour that is on the left hand needle thread for a 4 thread stitch, so that's the colour reel that should match. The other thing to be mindful of is if you haven't got a really great colour match and you're just neatening with a 3 or 4 thread, then the colour that you will see most if the seam is pressed so the right side of the overlocking is facing up will be the top looper. In my case, the red thread. Put the best colour match onto your top looper. The next issue to be mindful of is when you're placing reels of thread onto your overlocker and a couple of reels are running a bit low, presumably they all colour match. Always put the reels with the least amount of thread on your needles, either of the 2 needles, and put the reel with the most thread on the bottom looper, and the next would go on the top looper. Just to recap, always have the fullest reel on the bottom looper because it uses the most thread, followed by the top looper, and the two needles use the least amount of thread. Hopefully you're now feeling confident with your machine. Be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss my next video where I cover all the problems that can occur when using your overlocker and how to fix them.